I decided to live with my sister and niece, so you should look for another cheap apartment as you are a stranger after all, David told me, and I was so shocked that my eyes widened. I was speechless with my mouth open. I never thought he didn't know this in-law's house is registered under my name. I don't mind having my name removed from the registry, but I made one suggestion before that. Leaving is an option, but in that case, I would like you to consider divorce, I replied with a smile. David gave a sarcastic smile and said, "My dad has passed away, and you are no longer valuable to me." He acted as if everything was permissible. "Don't expect any property division since you brought it up," he said authoritatively, and I sadly lowered my face and covered my mouth. "Go on and cry. Did you think I'll stop you? Lament being abandoned by your husband," he said. However, I was holding back desperately the laughter that was welling up, because David has no idea about the situation he is about to face. I immediately started thinking about a new place to live. Yes, that place would be perfect, I decided in my heart. An image of a high-rise apartment worth $1 million floated in my mind. I am Becky, 34 years old. I was about to take a new step toward the rest of my life. David is 2 years older than me, 36, and works at a high school. He works at a private girls' high school. David is relatively young among the male staff and seems to be popular with the students. Sometimes he receives letters from them, and on Valentine's Day, he gets several chocolates. Every time, David reacts as if it's bothersome. "You don't make that troubled face in front of the students, do you?" I ask, and he gives a wry smile. "Of course not. I wonder why they give me chocolates even though they know I'm married. It wouldn't hurt to accept them," I say, reminiscing about my high school days when I had a crush on a teacher more than 10 years my senior. "That's dangerous. It would be a big problem if inappropriate rumors started at a girls' school," David says seriously. In this regard, David is very sincere. Even when he receives favorable looks from young students, he doesn't engage in inappropriate relationships, so I can feel at ease. David's seriousness probably comes from his father. Both of his parents were educators, and I feel their influence is significant. Currently, we live with David's parents at his childhood home. We planned to move out once we had a child, but unfortunately, we don't have any children yet. Moreover, the income I earn from my part-time job and the amount David contributes to the household don't leave much room for savings. Living with my in-laws is comfortable, and they are very warm towards me. My recent concern is the worsening condition of my father-in-law's legs. His ability to walk is deteriorating day by day, and he can't enjoy his walks as much as before. So we bought a wheelchair and tried to get him out as much as possible. I changed my job from a daytime position to an early morning shift at a bakery. This allows me to go for walks or shopping with my in-laws during the day. My parents have passed away, so I cherish my in-laws as if they were my own parents. They left me an inheritance, but I still wish they were alive. David has an older sister, Kim, who has a husband working for a major company and a 17-year-old daughter, Nicole. It's been 10 years since we got married, and Kim, who works, often leaves Nicole at our place. Thanks to that, Nicole and I have developed a close relationship. Nicole calls me Sister Becky and trusts me like her own sister. I was an only child, so it was very precious to have a sister-like presence in Nicole. Now that we don't have to take care of her at our in-laws, we still keep in touch frequently. However, my relationship with Kim isn't very good. Ever since the first time I met Kim when visiting David's parents, I never had a good impression of her. She laughed and said, "I thought he would choose someone cuter at our first meeting." Moreover, David didn't stand up for me at that time. If David's parents hadn't been upset by Kim's words, I might not have married David. David later said, "I don't choose people based on their looks. I believe that personality is the most important thing in marriage." However, those words didn't resonate with me much. Instead, the immediate anger from David's parents made me feel they cared about me. I wanted to be dutiful to David's parents as I couldn't be to my own. Lately, Kim has been coming back to the family home more frequently. She doesn't talk to me directly, but from conversations with David and his parents, it seems there are frequent conflicts between her and her husband. Despite both working, she's often pointed out for neglecting household chores, expected at least to handle cleaning. If I only worked a few hours part-time like Becky, I could manage housework too. But I work full-time, she sarcastically remarked, glancing at me. Kim often compares herself to me. For a long time, I didn't understand why, but it seems she's competing with me. Maybe Kim was upset because David's parents sided with me when we first met. Eventually, David defended me, which seemed to increase Kim's anger. Well, we're getting by only because Mom is helping out. It would be impossible alone, David said, and Kim laughed proudly. Without children and with Mom's help, it's natural you can manage household chores. No, you're not managing. Kim is more capable, isn't she? They laughed at me disdainfully. I caught my mother-in-law's eye watching them from a distance, and David quickly cleared his throat. However, Becky is doing her best. She's attentive, like taking care of my father with his bad legs. As I walked to the bedroom, leaving Kim surprised by his statement, I decided to contact Nicole. Nicole calmly responded, "Yes, Mom is wrong in this case." Despite having time, including when Nicole is at tutoring, the housework should be manageable. But it seems it's not being done. There's no sign of her being unfairly scolded. David typically sides with Kim. Kim is competitive with me, and David seems to harbor competitiveness towards his brother-in-law, who works at a top company. But as I see it, David is clearly lagging behind in this competition. His brother-in-law earns several times more than David. My point isn't about the amount earned, but how much one can spend on their family. I don't know how much David earns, nor does he know or show interest in my part-time income or savings. As long as we can get by on what he brings home, that's fine. I don't know what he does with the rest of his salary. However, there are nights he comes home late. He explains, "I was out drinking with work colleagues." Whether that's true or not, I can imagine David, who avoids even the slightest rumors among his students, having an affair. I never doubted him. David contributes $1,000 a month to our household. Normally, this amount would be challenging to sustain a household. This fact alone could be a seed for divorce or conflict. "This is my parents' home, so no need for rent," David says. "But $1,000 is a bit." I counter. "Then, how about asking my parents for living expenses?" He suggests. "That's not really the point." I say, but my true feelings don't seem to reach David. I don't expect David to support all three of us alone. However, I don't feel a sense of responsibility for his family in his actions. "You can say such things after you have children like your sister," he said, knowing it would hurt me. At that moment, I realized that although my husband cared for his sister, he did not show the same care for his wife. Meanwhile, my father-in-law's leg condition was gradually worsening. Our surroundings were all slopes, not suitable for wheelchair use. Why not consider moving? I suggested it to my in-laws when David was not around. But the budget, they responded. "We could use the funds from selling the house, and I can cover the additional mortgage payments," I offered, and my in-laws exchanged glances. "But Becky, that's a lot of money. You're already contributing more to the living expenses than David," my mother-in-law said with concern. "Don't worry," I reassured them. "I have an inheritance from my parents. If it can be used for my father-in-law and mother-in-law, my parents would be pleased," I explained. By then, my feelings for David might have almost disappeared. However, I felt affection for my in-laws and wished to continue living with them. We decided to move to a new home after discussing it with David's parents. Before moving, we made the house wheelchair accessible and installed handrails to ease my father-in-law's movement. I believe the new house, especially for my father-in-law, was much more comfortable than the previous one. in the old house. Even moving to the toilet was a struggle, but now he could use it with ease. Initially hesitant, my in-laws felt relieved after I accepted a certain condition. That was to put the new house in my name and keep this fact from David. I had kept the existence of my inheritance from my parents a secret from David. If David knew about your assets, he would rely on you even more. We can't allow that, my father-in-law said, showing his intention to protect me from relying on my parents' inheritance, which made me genuinely happy. I wish I had more strength. I'm sorry for being a burden, my father-in-law apologized, but I waved it off. Not at all. I look forward to our walks together every day, I told him, and he smiled gratefully. Thank you, he said. However, after having difficulty walking, my father-in-law's appetite decreased, and he lost quite a bit of weight. I hoped the new, more accessible house would help him regain his former vitality. What a lovely house, Kim commented while looking around during her visit. She tapped the handrail and added, but these handrails are a bit in the way. They spoil the look. The safety and well-being of my father-in-law are much more important than the appearance, I counted, and Kim, displeased, huffed and left without another word. We always leave the toilet lid open in our house. This is because lifting the lid is a significant burden for my father-in-law with his mobility issues. Therefore, we make sure to clean it regularly to prevent any bad odors. Despite the handrails, bending or leaning forward to lift the lid is painful for him, as he has complained. However, every time Kim uses the bathroom, she closes the toilet lid. No matter how much I explain, her behavior doesn't change. One day, after a loud noise, I rushed to find my father-in-law had fallen while trying to open the toilet lid. I've asked you not to close the lid, I exclaimed to Kim, who arrived later, supporting my father-in-law. I couldn't forgive her, even if she was my sister-in-law. Fortunately, my father-in-law wasn't seriously injured, but that didn't mean there was no problem. Leaving the lid open isn't hygienic, and it's not good feng shui either. You shouldn't leave the toilet lid open, Kim argued. Then, my usually calm mother-in-law retorted, that doesn't matter. Do you want to injure your father? It's okay, Mom. Kim didn't mean to. Really, it's exaggerating to say I caused my father's injury, Kim laughed off. But my mother-in-law's anger didn't subside, and she told Kim to leave the house. I thought we might live more peacefully. I momentarily felt relieved, but soon after, it was discovered that my father-in-law had cancer. The cancer had already metastasized throughout his body when found, leaving no room for treatment. Just half a year later, my father-in-law passed away. After the funeral, I was shocked by a conversation I overheard from the living room. Does this mean you'll inherit the house now? Kim was talking to someone. To which the reply was, I wonder, shouldn't Mom inherit it? That was undoubtedly David's voice. The expression on my mother-in-law's face, who was heading to the living room with me, froze. But it's a relief, isn't it? If his illness had dragged on, caregiving would have been tough, Kim said. True. But we have a convenient housekeeper, so no worries, David continued. What a thing to say. But maybe you're right. A laughing voice responded. Just as my mother-in-law reached to open the living room door, I firmly grasped her wrist. She was visibly angry, but I shook my head. Should we move in here too? Kim's cheerful laughter could be heard. I was undoubtedly furious. I had another reason to be angry with David. While organizing his suit for the funeral, I found receipts from dubious establishments and business cards with women's contact details. More of these were found when I searched his bag. These contacts were from afar, seemingly to avoid detection by school associates or students. Knowing he contributed little financially to the home while spending on such things fueled my anger. At that point, I was contemplating how to kick David out of the house. It's decided that my sister and niece will live together, so you, an outsider, should look for a cheaper apartment, David suddenly told me a few days after a month-long memorial service. I was dumbfounded, not understanding what he was saying. At that time, I learned that Kim's discord with her brother-in-law had deepened, leading her to declare, "I'm moving back home." Kim seemed to think that if she and Nicole left, her brother-in-law would apologize. So that's the plan. While surprised by the turn of events that I was being kicked out, David was unaware of a crucial fact. This in-law house is in my name, despite the fact that I am shouldering a mortgage payment of $1,800. I had been pondering how to evict David, but then realized there were other options. Considering transferring ownership to David, I devised a plan and smiled slyly. Leaving is an option, but in that case, I would like a divorce, I proposed. If I were to leave, divorce seemed fitting. Otherwise, I would end up at a disadvantage. Unaware of my intentions, David returned a spiteful smile. "My dad has passed away, and you are no longer valuable to me," he declared. He took on an unpleasant demeanor, thinking he was in a superior position. "Didn't expect any property division since you brought it up," he said condescendingly. I looked down and covered my mouth, replying with a trembling voice, "Understood." Hearing this, David laughed even louder. "Go on and cry. Did you think you'd be stopped? Lament being abandoned by your husband," he taunted. But I was desperately holding back laughter. The situation he was oblivious to, thinking he had the upper hand, was comical. Distracting David, I began thinking about my next place to live. Yes, that's ideal, I decided. I envisioned the $1 million high-rise apartment my parents left me. Recently, I was informed by the property management company that the family living in one of my properties was planning to move. It's one of several real estates left by my parents, and the rental income enriches my life. Especially the high-rise apartment my parents dreamed of holding a special place for them. I hadn't been particularly interested until now, but living in my parents' last dwelling might not be too bad. However, there's one concern. That is about my mother-in-law and Nicole, who will end up living in the same place as Kim and David. I continued to ponder how to rescue them. "Then I will go to a facility as well," my mother-in-law declared when I informed her that I would be divorcing David and leaving. "What? What are you talking about? Kim is coming back," David protested. "Yes, if you say such things, Dad would be sad," Kim added. "Dad would be sad? What would my mother-in-law think about Kim's words that trivialized the deceased father-in-law?" However, at that moment, I came up with a plan. I whispered it to my mother-in-law, and we decided to proceed with the plan without letting the other two know. If they won't let me leave, I'll just have to be kicked out. With the divorce pending, I continued to live in my in-laws' house for the time being. Currently, I am living in the same living room with my mother-in-law. This is a temporary measure until I find a new place to live. When Kim and Nicole started living together, my mother-in-law and I put our plan into action. "Why isn't there a dinner prepared for Dad tonight?" my mother-in-law said at dinner, causing David, Kim, and Nicole to be astonished. "What do you mean? Dad is no longer in this world. What are you talking about?" David was confused. Kim was angry, and Nicole could not hide her concern. Each showed a different reaction. Although it was necessary to keep this plan secret from Nicole to avoid suspicion, it pained my heart. "How can you say such a thing? Apologize to Dad." "It's bad luck, isn't it, Dad?" My mother-in-law spoke to the seed of the deceased father-in-law, creating an indescribable tension. I quietly prepared a meal for the deceased father-in-law. My mother-in-law continued to act as if he were still alive. If we closed the toilet lid, it would be inconvenient for Dad. The plan also served to admonish Kim and David for disrespecting the deceased. I also intended to see whether these two could ever take care of my mother-in-law in the future. Kim roughly grabbed my mother-in-law's hand and took her to the portrait. "Why are you saying Dad is here? He's no longer in this world. Isn't that obvious from the portrait?" Despite Kim's angry shouts, my mother-in-law calmly sat in front of the altar and quietly stared back at Kim. "Dad is right here," she said while pointing to the portrait, as if she could feel his presence. She delivered these words calmly yet coldly to Kim. Your terrible words and attitude are also seen by Dad. Always, she said, making Kim visibly shiver. Stop it. Kim screamed and left the room. I had expected her to be the first to break. Mom has finally gone crazy, Kim complained. But when you take her to the doctor, they say there's nothing wrong, right? I counted, and Kim raised her voice in distress. Yes, outside she acts perfectly fine. In front of the neighbors, she's impeccable. I can't stand it anymore. Yes, but there's still a mortgage on this house, and without Mom's pension, we can't make the payments. I overheard them discussing secretly in the living room. While doing the dishes, I pretended not to hear while listening. Finding a facility is tough, and the costs are significant. Kim, can you bear those? They discussed. No way. That's impossible. We need to save for Nicole's college tuition until she graduates. It seemed they were more troubled by the financial burden than my mother-in-law's health. Truly disgraceful. Reaching my limit, I turned off the tap and joined their conversation. I found a new place to live. If you'd like, I can take my mother-in-law and care for her until we find an appropriate facility, I suggested, watching them look at each other before adding, also, about the mortgage on this house. I've been the one making the payments. Really? Is that so? David muttered to himself in a daze. The amount left after deducting living expenses from my part-time income is enough for the payment. I had anticipated David thinking that. He probably assumed, now that my sister's income is there, it will be easy. Pretending not to hear, I chuckled inwardly as I told him, if your mother and I leave together, I'll transfer the property and loan payments to David. David simply replied, understood. At that moment, feeling relieved that my mother-in-law would be protected, a new development awaited us. However, it might have been a rather favorable turn of events for us. After returning home from high school, Nicole came to me with a serious concern. She had heard from a friend that her mother might be having an affair. Her friend had seen Kim walking arm in arm with a suited man one night, someone who wasn't Nicole's father. Upon further questioning, it turned out this happened while Nicole was at her tutoring session. It became clear that Kim's neglect of household duties wasn't due to parenting or work, but her affair. I assured Nicole I'll handle this matter and made her promise to keep it a secret. I immediately hired a detective to investigate Kim's affair. Perhaps she had let her guard down during the separation from her husband. Or maybe she was contemplating divorce. But her lapse came too soon. The legal divorce hadn't been finalized yet. Once the detective's evidence brought the affair to light, her brother-in-law initiated divorce proceedings. Nicole's father gained custody, and she went to live with him. Kim, along with her workplace lover, was sued for damages by her brother-in-law. Relieved, my mother-in-law and I left the in-laws house and moved to a high-rise apartment worth $1 million, starting a new life. One evening, while we were enjoying our peaceful days, the intercom suddenly rang. Displayed on the screen were David and Kim. "What brings you here?" I asked nonchalantly, but David retorted, "Because you won't answer the phone." "I'll step outside," I informed my worried mother-in-law before heading out. I had no intention of inviting them into my home or letting them pass the entrance. "Just leave it be," I muttered to myself as I headed to the front hall. "We can't talk here," I said, and we drove to a nearby cafe. During the drive, David kept complaining, "How can you afford to live in such a fancy high-rise apartment? It's an inheritance from my parents. I just rented it out to others until now," I explained. "Why didn't you tell me something so important?" David pressed, but I calmly replied, "Was there a need to? I was paying the living expenses. Besides, this property is not part of the estate division." David was the one who denied the property division. It was clear they had no grounds to complain to me. Once we arrived at the cafe and settled at a table, the conversation predictably turned to the mortgage of the in-laws house. "Why is it so high?" "A monthly payment of $1,800. David, trying to keep his voice down, was visibly furious. He must have wanted to scold me right there. I sipped my coffee leisurely and smiled gently. That's the value of the property, isn't it? I responded, to which David exploded, "This is no joke," and slammed the table. Kim tried to calm him as the surrounding patrons turned their gaze towards us. "Stop it. But Becky, you should have mentioned such a high mortgage," Kim said. Their desperation almost made me laugh. No gratitude was shown to me for paying that amount all these years. I wasn't asked. Besides, you left the title transfer mostly to me, right? I said quietly, hinting that it's improper to complain only when inconvenienced. Considering Kim was facing compensation claims from her husband and the wife of her lover, I could somewhat understand their situation. Moreover, the affair being exposed at her workplace made her resign. From my perspective, it was all a result of her own making. I gently turned my gaze to Kim, and I said with a smile, "You've had it tough, haven't you?" "What do you mean?" "Because he doesn't contribute enough money to the household." "What?" Kim stared at David. Feeling the side glance, David vaguely responded, "Well, that. Ah, I see. It hasn't been long since we left." As I ambiguously spoke, realizing Kim might not yet understand, David said quietly, "Don't talk about unnecessary things," and glared at me. "Hey, what are you talking about?" Kim turned to me, demanding an explanation. I shrugged and pulled out some documents from my bag. "He only gave $1,000 to the household and frequented places like this." I laid out dubious receipts and women's business cards on the table. "What? What is this? What do you mean by going to places like this?" Kim was more outraged than expected, loudly reading the names of the establishments. "How foolish. Disgusting." Kim's exclamation triggered David's anger. "What are you saying? You two engaged in such embarrassing acts of infidelity at your workplace." An ugly dispute unfolded before me, each critiquing the other's misdeeds. I sipped my coffee, quietly observing their argument. Concerned about a possible complaint from the cafe, I addressed David. "Ah, right. Sorry to interrupt your conversation." With that, David ceased his quarrel with Kim. Perhaps a unique communication between a long-time married couple. "You were saying?" he inquired. "I almost forgot, but there's a popular tutoring school near this cafe." "What?" They looked at each other, then back at me, puzzled. "It seems many students spend their pre-class time here," I whispered to David. "See that uniform? Doesn't it look familiar? Wonder how many are around, including those in casual clothes?" Suddenly, David stood up, causing a loud noise. He scanned the surroundings, noticing the onlookers. I could hear subdued laughter around us. It seemed my choice of cafe made sense to David and Kim. "Just so you know, I wasn't the one who raised his voice." David remained standing, his face downturned, trembling. "Thank you for exposing yourself. I'm looking forward to school tomorrow." I rested my cheek on my hand, gazing intently at David, and smirked. Before me, David crumbled to the floor. Eventually, David and Kim's in-law house was put on the market, and they moved to an old, small apartment. Kim struggled to find a new job, and David resigned from the girls' school. It seems there was a complaint from a parent about a problematic staff member. Even without the complaint, David would have resigned, but the call spread the rumor. I knew this because Nicole's friend attended the school David worked at and provided the information. As David feared, the story spread quickly. After hearing it from Nicole, my mother-in-law exclaimed, "What a pitiful pair," and I burst into laughter. Once, they came to us, relying on the inheritance I received and my mother-in-law's income. They came to apologize, but I told them, "You don't need to apologize anymore," and quickly sent them away. I still live with my mother-in-law, enjoying the company of Nicole, who often visits our high-rise apartment. She likes the view from the windows, similar to the vast sky my parents once admired. With the curtains wide open, our meals are always delightful. I hope to fulfill the filial duties to my mother-in-law that I couldn't to my parents, cherishing our life together.